Hello, my name is Izzy. I'm a junior at ETHS.
My name is Ellie. I'm a freshman at ETHS.
And we are here with...
My name's Steve Hackney, and I'm a candidate for the Evanston City Council First Ward.
So you would be my council member.
Great.
To start off, how did you get here today?
I walked. One of the things that I prized about where we were lucky enough to live is that it's in walking distance of the city center. So we do a lot of walking.
Nice. Why are you running for city council?
I'm running for city council because I think Evanston is at an important crossroads in its history. Our school elementary population is down 20%. Our downtown is suffering economically. There are high vacancy rates in retail properties, commercial office space. There's very little housing available in Evanston, and what is available is not affordable. So I think a family like mine from 15 years ago when I moved up here, at the time we just had one daughter, and we were moving up from the city, I worry that that family today might choose to live somewhere other than Evanston. And I'd like to try to change that and see if we can get the city back on a positive track. So there are other things that need to be done. Certainly environmental justice is one of them, but the focus of my campaign has been trying to figure out how to turn the city around economically.
So on that climate note, Everyone has special traits and gifts they can use to change the world. So thinking about your skills and strengths, what is your climate action superpower?
That's a great question. I think what I would say is that as a trial lawyer, I am someone who has a lot of experience and financial sophistication. So I spent my career litigating and understanding financial statements and budgets and valuations. And the reason I think that's a climate superpower is because to do a lot of the things that we need to do in order to decarbonize, we need capital. And so figuring out where to get the capital and how to get the capital and what other types of goals should be sacrificed to allow us to get the capital is part of achieving our climate action goals. So these two things have to go together. One of my most important cases when I was at Kirkland & Ellis was the bankruptcy of the city of Detroit. And the reason I reference that in the context of climate change, you might be thinking, what does that have to do with the climate change? But when a major American city has to go bankrupt, what it should tell you is there are not going to be a lot of resources available for climate action. So that means whether it's Chicago or whether it's Evanston, you have to maintain economic vitality right alongside climate action. And the two have to go together.
Thank you. All right. Moving on. What are the two most important issues you are focused on in your campaign as a challenger? Why?
Well, the two most important issues, I think, both of which will intersect with environmental justice, are first zoning reform and then second economic renewal. And maybe I can focus on zoning reform a bit. There is a high demand for housing in this country today. I call it a yawning demand. It is absolutely capacious. And I think that the cities that figure out how to meet this demand in a responsible way are going to be the cities that win the next 50 years. And I want Evanston to be one of those cities. Now, I suggested that dovetails with climate interests, and you might be thinking, how? One of the best parts of the proposed zoning reforms is the idea that we will incentivize what's called transit-oriented development. That is increased density near transit stations and transit lines. And transit-oriented development is one of those things that yields both economic development for the downtown area, but it also provides ancillary benefits. It strengthens our infrastructure. It provides customers for the rapid transit system, which, by the way, is hurting post-pandemic. And then it also serves climate action in the sense that it allows tenants who don't have a car, and it has a bunch of people living in a very energy efficient building. So this is an example of how something like zoning reform, which may not seem on its face to have much to do with climate action, can actually have important connections to climate action. I think we already talked a bit about economic renewal and how that is needed to fund climate action, so I won't repeat that.
Awesome. So many of the policies before council are future focused, like Envision Evanston, the Healthy Buildings Ordinance, and CARP. These policies will have a bigger impact on our lives than anyone else. Youth voices are often drowned out. So if elected, how would you elevate youth voices?
That's a great question. My daughter, Ava, is a sophomore at ETHS right now. And so is Ellie also a sophomore?
Freshman.
You're a freshman.
Right in between.
And you're a junior. So it's at least good that I have one of those voices in my house. And my other two daughters are in 8th grade. My daughter, Vivian, will be joining you guys at the high school next year. And my youngest, Ren, is in 5th grade. What makes engaging with young people better is when they organize. And the fact that you guys are in this group is positive because it allows us to engage with you. The fact that you're setting this up and doing this is an example of that engagement. And I would say more is more, but I will say one thing that's really important, right? Which is politicians are engaged in a competition to try to get the most votes, and people respond to their incentives. And by the way, this is a key part of climate action, right? Setting incentives to see if you can change behavior. So one of the things that would help is if you can organize eligible voters, because I'm sure there are some at ETHS, right? If you're 18 and you're registered in ETHS. In fact, it would be interesting to know how many 18-year-olds there are at ETHS, but it could be a more potent electoral force than Northwestern, because a lot of the Northwestern kids aren't registered in Evanston. So I just put that out there for you to think about. I want to hear the young people's voices either way as inputs on policy, but what really gets politicians' attention are votes. So figuring out a way to marshal the votes at ETHS is one way to improve impact of young people.
80% of carbon emissions come from the building sector, and a vast majority of these emissions come from Evanston's 500 largest buildings. The proposed Healthy Buildings Ordinance would mandate that these buildings make energy-efficient improvements, procure renewable energy, and reduce on-site emissions, all while ensuring that this is done while maintaining affordability. Do you support the proposed Healthy Buildings Ordinance?
I do. This is one of the most important items of contrast between my opponent and I. In fact, at the most recent city council meeting, at the urging of my friend Jack and others, I spoke in favor of the Healthy Building Ordinance. My opponent voted to table it and signaled that she's interested in making sure that there's a fully negotiated rules regime before they pass it, which is a way of poison pilling the ordinance, because I fear there will never be a fully negotiated rules regime that we can all then vote on. So her strategy is to find a way to avoid voting on this and table it forever, put it on a slow vote. My strategy was to stand up in favor of it. I think it's an important thing, in part because we said we would when we passed CARP unanimously. And one of my least favorite things about political life in Evanston is virtue signaling. I hate when people get up and signal virtue without actually accomplishing something. And we'll be guilty of that at a community-wide level if we pass CARP unanimously that has these reduction targets in it, and then fail to pass legislation that actualizes them.
At ETHS, we learn about the value of teamwork through sports and group projects. From those lessons, it's clear that the City Council isn't always the best example of teamwork. If elected, what can you and your colleagues do to have a more productive collaboration as a City Council?
This is a very important concern, because one of the most simple parts of a functioning body is not necessarily who's in favor of what policy. It's just literally, can they engage in civility and collaboration with one another? And I'm surprised that I have to say that about a bunch of adults, but the fact of the matter is we could use some more of that. And unfortunately, fortunately, the way you do that is simply through personal relationships. So you have to be willing to sit down. You have to be willing to get to know people and listen to them and understand their perspective and what their goals are, while also communicating your own. It can't just be about what you want in order to strike political compromises or to build coalitions. And so what we have a little bit too much of right now are people who are willing to be the lone holdout on policy and signal virtue to the community, but without doing the hard work of compromise that the other council members are doing. And it creates frustration, and you can see it up on the dais from time to time. And I'll leave it at that.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Are we at the end of my interview? The one thing I wanted to say that I was really proud of was I had the pleasure of meeting Rob Ketting the other day and gaining the endorsement of the bike pack. which is the Political Action Committee of the Evanston Transit Alliance. And I think that the network that Evanston Transit Alliance has envisioned for the city that is already in the process of being built out. And if you haven't met Rob, he is a great guy. He would absolutely sit down with your group and walk you through it. I highly recommend it. But I think it could be another one of these solutions that's good economically, that's good for the environment, good for local businesses, good for our health, because it could create a culture of biking, I think, in this town that we already have a decent one, and I think it'll just strengthen it. So that's the one thing I wanted to add. I was really proud to get that endorsement.
So you're running for First Ward older person. It'd be kind of crazy if we had somebody from Northwestern, a student, perhaps, to come speak with you.
That would be crazy.
Well, I'm Gracie Nimmer. I am a sophomore at Northwestern and also part of Fossil Free Northwestern. And my question is basically, how do you see the relationship between Northwestern and Evanston maybe growing? It's been a very contentious relationship historically, especially regarding economics and the environment, which you've talked a lot about. So I'm wondering, how do you think we could improve this relationship?
Well, that is another great question and a really important one, because Evanston won't thrive if Northwestern isn't thriving, and the reverse is also true. And so one of the things that I said to a friend of mine who's in the liaison position at Northwestern was, my perception of the relationship is that it is non-strategic and transactional. Mm-hmm. And for two parties that are as important to one another as we are to each other, our relationship should be the opposite of that. It should be strategic and non-transactional. Mm-hmm. So what I would like to do is I would like to start finding ways to build successes with Northwestern that we can hopefully build on to create a more trusting and durable relationship. And if I can give you one example, one thing that I think is a natural for us to work on together that fits directly with the topic of what we've talked about today is also mitigating the effects of climate change, and in particular on the lakeshore. Now, we had an ambitious lakeshore plan that was about $100 million price tag, and it was going to be funded by grants from FEMA. Okay, so I will give you 0 guesses to guess whether or not we're going to get those grants from FEMA from the Trump administration, because you don't even need one guess. We're not going to get that money. The other night at the city council meeting, Jack was there with me, there was a terrific presentation, I thought, on shoreline preservation, and the price tag on it for the city was $30 million. Leveraging the technical expertise of Northwestern and engaging in a joint endeavor to figure out the strategy for protecting our joint asset that we literally share, strikes me as a really good place to start a more positive relationship. And I think that would be one of the first things that I would recommend, amongst others, to Dave Davis and others at Northwestern. So really important question. I can't say that I can wave a magic wand, because there's two sides to that relationship. Yeah. And so that's the best I can do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much.